There are only 5 million sheep in the US, or 1 sheep for every 65 people, which perhaps explains why a sixth of Americans have insomnia. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to farmland. Neither country, of course, is a stranger to farmland, and everybody the world over needs it. For farmers, these are places of intense work day in and day out. For the rest of us, they are those mysterious places you drive past on the interstate wondering what's going on in that barn. And this is true in both countries, but having flown over the two of them, both in real life and on Flight Simulator, I've come to realise there are some stark differences. And a quick disclaimer for Uncle Toby, who himself is a farmer. This is not a video exploring the differences between farming practices, but rather the visual differences that you encounter when you drive past a farm, or fly over it, or secretly trespass. Don't trespass. And so without further ado, here are 6 ways that British and American farmland is very different. I've said it before and I'll say it again, when it comes to these kind of comparisons, size isn't everything, unless Britain comes out on top. Now, I don't think anybody is going to be too surprised to discover that the United States has more farmland than the United Kingdom. It makes sense, after all, the United States is about 41 times larger. But what if we did this? What if we took each country and looked at the land and then worked out what percentage of that land was farmland? Well, some interesting and some would say surprising details start to emerge, forcing me to talk like a BBC presenter from the 1950s. I'll stop that now. Firstly, roughly 44% of the United States is agricultural land, and when I say that out loud, that sounds like a lot, given of course how large the United States is. But when you look at a map of America and you consider the fact that much of that farmland is contained either within the Midwest, the Great Plains, or the South, it suddenly doesn't feel like a lot, at least to my British brain. This is the majority of England. I mean, the majority of England really just kind of looks like this. And my instinct, for the first time in 21 years, was correct. A staggering 70% of the UK's land is used for agricultural purposes, meaning that percentage-wise, farmland is to the UK what water is to the earth. Actually, come to that, so is water. On the other hand, there's one difference that isn't quite so sizable. This. Lost in the pond fanatics around the globe are probably shaking their fist at the screen right now thinking, Lawrence, how could you include colour when a few weeks ago you said this? I grew up near farming areas that were not dissimilar to what we're seeing now. Different patches of earth, green, brown and yellow, just like this. And the answer is I was busy flying a plane and didn't have time for facts. But if you've ever visited farmland in either country, you'll probably notice that Britain has more vibrant greenliness. And what do I mean by greenliness? Well, that does for the word green what the word cleanliness does for the word clean. In other words, I'm just trying to get a word in the dictionary. Basically, Britain's green pastures are greener than Americans' green pastures. Now, there's a misconception out there that Britain is somehow unique in having bright yellow fields that produce rapeseed. And the reason that that's a misconception is that America has them too, and they're everywhere. The difference is that the crop here is wisely not referred to as rapeseed, but canola. That said, whatever you call it, it's not the most highly produced crop in either country. So let's take a look at what is. There might be no more important element when it comes to the differences between British and American farmland than crops. On the one hand, there are many kinds of crops that are grown in both countries, but each country has its priorities. For example, in the United States, the most widely produced crop is corn. Every year, the United States produces about 14 billion bushels of corn. That's about 43 bushels per person. What is a bushel? Right, well, to put into context how large that is, soybean comes in at second with 4 billion bushels. And from experience, I can tell you that those two crops are practically all you see in the state of Indiana, and yet it's not at the epicenter. Meanwhile, the most widely produced crop in the UK is wheat, unless you include riding crops, which you can get in Soho. But since I'm only now learning about bushels, I had to do some complicated math to see how wheat production in the UK compared to corn production in the US. And this is because A, UK farms don't seem to report measurements by that unit, and B, if they did, a British bushel is measured differently to an American bush, All. Yeah, I might have to write some sort of bushel conversion song. However, the UK produced 16 million tonnes of wheat in 2019. And according to one of those unit converters on Google, this equates to about 500 million American bushels, or, 9 bushels for every Brit. So, American corn production wins. On the other hand, America produces wheat too, but only 5.5 bushels for every person. It's a small victory. America's obsession with corn is second only perhaps to its obsession with rectangles. And observationally, this obsession seems to extend to the layout of its farmland. Already flying over Kansas, you can spot kind of a lot of rectangles. Not all of them, some of them aren't even four-sided in any capacity. But it looks like a huge share of them at least have 4 sides. And yes, we really are talking about this. In the UK, surprise, surprise, pasture shapes are a little more eccentric. I recognise there wasn't too much I could do to stave off the yawns that are probably coming out of your mouths right now. But notice these different patches. Look how curved they are. Look how decidedly non-rectangular they are. You realise that I'm adding urgency into my voice just to make this that bit more exciting. I'm surprised, actually. I'm quite surprised. There are a strange amount of rectangles up here from the air. Now that I'm here. I thought there weren't. But I would say that square shapes are heavily outnumbered by the more unusual shapes. Like there's a triangle, for example. In many ways, an entire video called something like 5 farming objects I only encountered after moving to America could have been devoted to the difference between British and American farming objects. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to focus on one object from each country. Something that you're more likely to encounter on American farms and not so much on British are silos. Some US farms have several silos. They're those cylindrical things that look like they're about to send crops into space. The object, if you want to call it that stands out on British farmlands are dry stone walls. Basically a wall that's constructed without mortar. This means that cows are probably just 2 opposable thumbs away from escaping and wreaking revenge on humanity. And speaking of animals, ... that's ellipses spoken. Once again, there's a lot of crossover between the two countries as to which animals are used as livestock. But when it comes down to the animals that you're more likely to see on each country's farms, the difference is like Iron Man, in that it's stark. In Britain, the 3 most famous sounds are Big Ben, the pouring of the kettle, and baa! That was a sheep. And that's because Britain, nay, the United Kingdom, that was a horse sound, is home to 23 million sheep, which equates to about 1 sheep for every 3 Brits, and I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere. And if a Royal Rumble broke out, the UK sheep would absolutely crush their American counterparts, who are outnumbered by about 5 to 1. That's right, there are only 5 million sheep in the US, or 1 sheep for every 65 people, which perhaps explains why 1/6 of Americans have insomnia. The main reason for this is that lamb and mutton just don't carry the same cultural significance that they do in the UK. Instead, Americans have a stronger appetite for another animal. I think it was the philosopher Bart Simpson who once profoundly implored, "Don't have a cow, man." But did America bloody listen? No. It has more cattle than Britain has people. In fact, there are 9 entire states where cattle outnumber humans and children. And now I really am afraid of the opposable thumbs thing. In total, there are roughly 94 million cattle in the United States, about 1 for every 3.5 people. And don't get me wrong, there's no shortage of cows in the UK, about 10 million, but that still only equates to 1 cow for every 7 people. So I could cheer about the victory of our sheep until the cows come home, but in America, they often do. Throughout this video, you see me flying over the farming pastures of Kansas and Lincolnshire in England. If you would like to see the full video with my commentary, why not become a $5 patron of Lost in the Pond today? You can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Until next time, moo. Here's all the corn, it's only a bushel. Put it on my plate, nothing rhymes with bushel.